Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to go over our newly added API content block that we've now added in the Botmock platform so that you can pull external data from JSON-based APIs and use them around your conversation flow when building a prototype. In this case, this is a customer service bot generic project, but I should mention that the API content block is now available within all existing and new Flow projects within all different types of platforms. So if you're building something for Facebook Messenger or Amazon Alexa or anything we have, the API content block will be available. And it'll be available right after all of your specific content blocks here, the platform specific ones. So in this case, we're going to click this. As you can see, here's all of our generic content blocks. And then we have the main ones, jump, note, API, and delay, which are available for all projects. So before we add it, I just want to share the context that we're building in here. So in this tutorial here that I've set up a simple customer service bot project, which, let's say the user wants to ask a few questions, billing, shipping. And in this case, I'm just going to go for the shipping route here, and I'm going to build that out a bit with the API content block. So for example, it's going to be a simple onboarding process that we're going to create where it'll say, "Hi, Nikhil, let me pull up your account ID," and then it will hit an API content block, return live data from a real API, and then from there, ask me to confirm if this is my correct account ID so that I can get the shipping information. So to start off, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add our API content block. So in this case, we're going to go down, like I said, under all of the other generic specific content blocks, and we're going to add the API block. And as you can see here, it does already show up with an error to remind you that you have to set it up, but we don't have any example data for you. You have to set it up all by yourself. So we're going to jump in here. And as you can see, the API content block, you can still change the title of the block. You can change the status. You can assign it to someone. You have revisions. So you have your normal pieces of the content block here. But the big piece of it here is with request type, request URL, headers, parameters, mapping, and even the ability to test the API request. So in this case, I'm going to test with a placeholder API, just a simple test API that we have here. I'm going to copy the URL from that. We're going to hit save here. I had a simple note set up here so that we can get this going. And then here's our request URL. And to it, we're going to make a GET request. A POST request requires sometimes a more complex thing to do, but this is just a simple way to fetch the data without having too much setup here. So then you have the request headers and the request parameters, which have to do with this request URL, this endpoint. This is how these can customize ways that you hit it and how things will come out formatted and whatnot. But I do recommend getting familiar with APIs before jumping into this, as this is a bit of a more advanced feature. And we will certainly go over some of these in more depth, potentially in a future more advanced API content block tutorial. But for this one, I'm just going to make a GET request and I'm going to map it to a variable, which happens in the response mapping section. So the response JSON path will be based on the API requests that we actually collect here, or the JSON output from the API request. So I'm going to hit test. As you can see, right in Botmock, you have all the data you need to look around at different pieces of posts here that we've, hit and we've gotten from the endpoint that we've added. And in this case, I just want to grab the first user ID, nothing crazy, just going to go ahead and do user ID. And then I want to map it to a variable. Now, you're going to want to have a variable set up so that we can actually properly capture the information from the API and then move it around the conversation. So I'm going to create an account ID. In this case, I'm going to create an account ID variable here. The variable type in this case, we'll leave it as text. We'll leave it at the default value as blank, and we won't select an entity type. We're just going to create a variable here. And then we're going to go back and we're going to actually map it properly this time. So as you saw before, user ID, we have a response JSON path, and then we're going to map it to a variable being account ID, something as simple as that. And then we're going to go ahead and close it up right here, and we're going to test it live. So we're going to go to the Run tab. Hi, welcome to Botmock Customer Support. We're going to go through the shipping route here. Let me pull up your account ID. It will call the API, show you that it was called, and now we can expand on it a little bit. So if the API was called properly, we should be able to get a response back. And now we're going to add it here where it's going to say something along the lines of, for example, here, it'll say, your account ID is, and then it's going to pull up that variable, and it's going to ask you correct. And you'll be able to say a simple yes or no here, but we're just going to, start with the basic example. We're not going to expand too far out here. And we're going to go back through run now. We're going to go through this, and now you'll actually be able to see the data coming in live into a variable. So pull up your account ID, it'll call the API, and your account ID is 1, correct? And now we have a full process here of actually calling a live API, grabbing the data, and setting up a nice onboarding process for customer support. Thank you so much for tuning into this tutorial.